Hey everyone, before we get started on this one, I want to say thank you for the patience. I haven't been able to upload in a couple of days due to some microphone and audio issues. I'm glad you guys are here to listen to this story. And today's story is the third part of a series from CavalierRigg, the man who's been writing about being a hospital security guard. We're going to get a little bit of backstory to where he came from. Good evening again, NoSleep. Hope you're all doing well. This past week I was contemplating what story I would share with you, trying to keep up with the flooding in my inbox and my first and second stories. I have many requests for more stories too, from the hospital that I work at, but I've been having some trouble picking what story to share, and frankly, I haven't had much time to write since the start of the new semester. However, after finding a little bit of time to write while I'm at work getting some overtime, I opted to share a story with you all. Not a story from my job as a security guard at the hospital, but a very creepy experience during my service in the U.S. Army. This story will make more sense if you know a little bit about how I got to be there. If you jump right into the creepiness, feel free to skip ahead to the next section. After I graduated from high school in 2013, I moved to Yuzhno-Sahalinsk, Russia, on the island of Sakhalin. I lived there for about 2 years, refining my Russian speaking as I acted as an interpreter for the Americans at ExxonMobil natural gas headquarters on the island. I loved my time there. The nature around the city was amazing. Beautiful mountains on the east to climb and jog through, snowboardings on the weekends and in the wintertime, and taking trips to the south of the island to see Wakai, Japan, on clear days. It was great. However, after 2 years, I started to get homesick, so I returned to my hometown in Arizona, where I met with a buddy of mine who enlisted in the Army. After talking to him for a couple hours and after meeting a recruiter the next day, I had officially signed up to be in the next batch heading off to basic training during the summer of 2015. Fort Benning, Georgia, felt like hell on earth as I made through my 3 phases of basic training and through AIT, Advanced Individual Training, where I became an 11B, 11 Bravo, infantryman. I was uncomfortable when I was called in by one of the commanding officers, telling me that higher command had requested all critical language speakers, Russian, Korean, Arabic, etc., would go through a few interviews with one of the colonels on base. My heart raced as I stood at attention the next morning when a full bird colonel asked me questions pertaining to my language skills, why I lived in Russia, and how well I spoke. About 2 weeks after our meeting, I was instructed to take a language aptitude test, and upon completing that, I was called back to the colonel's office. Being a Russian speaker, I was being sent to one of the first duty stations, Fort Greenlee, Alaska, where I would be going through the Northern Warfare Training Center in Black Rapids. Confused, I asked the colonel what this meant and to dumb it down for me, and he explained that I would be learning how to soldier fight in sub-zero conditions against Russia, if they were ever to try anything across the Bering Strait. At this point, it was already mid-October, and I was heading north in a week. My body hurt from the cold and the turbulence, as the 4-point harness strapping me into my seat of the UH-60 Blackhawk bit down into my skin. The helicopter droned through the dark Alaskan air. At 0400, as we made our way to Rally Point Zulu, deep in the Tingia Black Rapids, Alaska. I muttered under my breath as the helicopter lurched to the right, causing me to look at the faint teal glow of my tactical wristwatch. 11:30, 2015. 0411, 2 degrees Fahrenheit. The written and classroom portions of the training hadn't been too hard. We were on our way to spend the next 3 days putting our survival skills and strategy skills to the test. I leaned my head back to try to desperately get some sleep before we reached our landing site. As I began to drift off, I thought to myself how rare it was to like all the guys in my squad and platoon. Most of the men in my squad were older, and all of them had quite a colorful sense of humor. Most of them were from all around the country, except for 2 natives to Alaska, Anchor, a 20-year-old guy from Anchorage, Alaska, and a Native American called Beads, named after the beads he kept wrapped around his arm, given to him by his father to ward off evil and protect him in battle. Beads was a younger guy, like me, and he was a specialist in Bering and Native Alaskan languages. And during any potential time of war, he would be part of a psychological operation unit that would try to turn native Inuit Russians to fight for us. Beads and Anchor, during the short 9 days, had already become 2 of my closest friends after we had been put together as a 3-man team within our squad. I jerked awake from my dozing as the cold wind came pouring through the open door of the Blackhawk, the rotors now whipping snow in every direction as the crew chief signaled us that this was our stop. I slid my eye protection down and grabbed my weapon as we exited the helicopter's chem light marked exit door, making sure to duck under the spinning rotors above as we moved to the tree line. Our rally point was near a perfect circular opening in the dense walls of trees around us. No doubt groomed and cut back by the Army for training purposes, and now a safe landing zone for aircraft. As the last guy slid out of the bird, the crew chief raised his fist as he slid the door closed and the Blackhawk returned into the blackness in a whirlwind of snow as it disappeared from view, leaving only its loud whirring to grow ominously quiet. A light snow started to fall on us as we began setting up camp in complete blackness, desperately trying to use the red glow from our tactical lights to help us set up our new equipment in our new patrol base. I set up my weapon's tripod as I turned to see the platoon leader, an officer, barking orders and swearing at us to move faster, as the grades and training cadre were taking notes on the soldiers' tasks and effectiveness to grade who would pass the course. Our platoon leader and commanding officer was a newly commissioned 2nd lieutenant from Alabama named Lieutenant Stoker. He was a lanky guy who had gone through the college's ROTC program and acted like he knew the Army inside and out. In the Army, we have a saying, respect the rank, not the man, and nobody really embodied it as well as Lieutenant Stoker embodied the saying on this particular cold morning. Brash, arrogant, and quick to pull rank, Lieutenant Stoker was already having a hard time commanding the respect of his troops without his constant whining and bullshittery, blaming small mistakes on his gear, troops, or circumstances instead of on himself. To make matters worse, Lieutenant Stoker had taken a special disliking to me, Beads, and Anchor, as he overheard a private counseling I had with a squad leader about my distaste for the lieutenant. Stoker knew I didn't like him, and now he was going to make sure that was in his mind, that hatred was warranted. And to add insult to injury, him knowing that Beads and Anchor and I were best friends assigned us extra duties that ate up our free time before we could step foot into Phase 2 in the forest, effectively canceling my ability to write home for a week and interrupting a small ceremony that Beads said would bless us with safety as we entered the dense taiga. It was also for this reason and personal distaste that I was beginning to carry one of the platoon's M24B machine guns, about 25 pounds, through the deep snow, with Anchor and Beads being my assistant gunner and my ammo bearers, respectively. The next day was long and grueling, climbing up ice-covered hills and lifting equipment over snowbanks, moving through pine trees that were so tightly packed that visibility was only about 3 to 4 meters in front of you at any one given time. Moving through the snow was long and irritating. The breaks were frequent as we managed to move within 3 kilometers of our target zone. While most of the training itself is classified, I can tell you that part of the training includes taking blanks, bulletless rounds of ammunition, with laser adapters on our weapons to compete against other squads and platoons, seizing the elements to attack them. To oversimplify, the Northern Warfare training course was essentially having all the students play a large game of laser tag whilst having objects and smaller tanks to reinforce the frozen warfare instruction that we had back at Fort Greenlee. Suddenly, I saw a flicker of movement to my right. As Beads dropped to the snowy ground, I rushed up to him, breaking our temporary fire team wedge formation to make sure that my battle buddy was safe. And that's when I saw it. A dead snow rabbit. Blood splattered the snow and ice around it as a black gleam from its eyes looked up at us from its eviscerated body. Chunks of what I can only imagine were once its organs were scattered in all different directions. Some were even hanging from the low branches of nearby bushes. It was gruesome and an absolute mess. Beads held a talisman close to himself as he started chanting rhythmically in what I could only assume was a Native American language, a prayer for the animal spirit, he told me as he began covering the lurid sight with snow. I could see the fear in his eyes as he motioned for me to get back into formation. A bad omen, he whispered as we separated. I don't know why, but before then, I had never felt so uneasy in my entire life. There was an aura of dread around us. After giving the all-clear hand sign, Lieutenant Stoker ordered us forward. After about another hour or so of bushwhacking, the trainers and overseers called us to set up camp for the night in a small clearing, similar to our initial landing zone, except in size. The clearing stretched for about 200 meters in every direction from the center, with the center itself being a hill raised like a terrain feature, an ideal high ground and defendable position, every soldier's dream. I sighed as I looked at my watch, 15:12, or 3:12 p.m. For some reason that I don't know, when you are so close to the Arctic Circle, in the wintertime, you only get about 6 hours or so of good sunlight before the sun sets again, and most of the day is bathed in long shadows as the sun glides across the horizon. We were instructed to pull 360-degree security, entrench ourselves in the snow, and set up our 3-man wintertime camouflage pup tents, because we knew that the enemy team was in the area, and we didn't want to risk an ambush during the long night without being prepared to make them pay for attacking us on a raised hill. Lieutenant Stoker set my fire team up on the northern apex of the triangle that would become our patrol base for the night. This was not out of the ordinary, as Army doctrine teaches you that you put the highest casualty-producing weapons at the apex of the patrol bases, so in case of an attack, they can swing and pivot to one line or another, depending on where the suppressing gunfire was needed. So we set up our equipment facing north, our 151 spotter scope and the M240B looking deadly and facing the pitch-black forest and the snow-heavy fields below. Beads, Anchor, and I set up our rotations. 1 spotter, 1 gunner, 1 asleep in the tent, with rotations every 2 hours. Anchor and Beads volunteered to be the first watch, as I got into the tent and turned my radio headset down as to not interfere with my sleep, but to hear any orders that came from the commanding officer, or from any guys if they needed me. I felt my eyelids close immediately from what felt like lead bricks as fatigue from the long day slowly entered my body. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by a loud, blood-curdling scream off in the distance, followed by a few brief moments of silence.
Hunter 1-7, this is Hunter 1-9. Did you hear that?
The quiet radio transmission whispered into my ear as one of the other soldiers was trying to get in contact with the LT.
Affirmative, Hunter 1-9. What the hell was that? Hunter 1-5, please update.
The lieutenant called back asking for Beats to shed some light on the situation.
I'm not too sure, but we're not the only predators out here. Sir, there's a pack of wolves out here too. They're probably just hunting. That sounded like the death cry of a caribou to me. Affirm, just keep your eyes peeled and watch for the wolves.
Lieutenant Stoker replied, unnecessarily trying to hide the unease in his voice. Satisfied with Beats' explanation, however, the radio went back to silent as I could hear slight shuffling in the snow outside. Most likely from Beads or Anchor repositioning themselves for comfort. I breathed a sigh of relief as the soft glow of my watch informed me that I had another hour of good sleep left. I was shook awake by Anchor, who had opened up the tent for me to start my watch. I gave him a silent high five as I took my spot on the M240B, laying down and attempting to clear my sight picture down the sights. The world started coming more and more into my view as the night vision monocular powered to life and gave me an infrared view of the field in front of me. I looked up and took in the view of the beauty above me. Bands of green and purples and red danced silently above me as the northern lights shimmered in the atmosphere. Despite the dark and the cold, the nighttime sky was lit up with more stars than I had ever seen before, and all of them were spectating the luminous dresses and fluttering colors of the aurora. To this day, that sight is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. My train of thought was suddenly broken by Beats patting my helmet with the palm of his hand as he whispered something into the radio as it crackled to life.
Sir, this is Hunter 1-5 on red side element. We have positive movement through the trees, bearing 281 degrees at 11 o'clock, 212 meters away.
I turned my weapon as I dialed the distance into the slide. I struggled as I tried to scan the tree line for what Beads was seeing. As I heard LT confirm Beads' call out and told us to crawl over to our apex, I kept scanning the tree line desperately, hoping to see the outline of a few soldiers trying to get up into a raiding party. However, as I looked behind the tree line, I did see what Beads was talking about. Just barely behind the tree line was an extremely tall and lanky figure, maybe close to 8 feet tall, with arms that came down to its shins. While I couldn't make out any details in the dark, I could easily make out the figure opposite to the trees due to its movement. The figure was swaying from side to side, seemingly shifting its weight from one foot onto the other, while it moves its head slightly from the left and to the right in an inquisitive manner. Was it staring at us? I thought to myself. My blood turned even colder at the prospect of whatever this thing was attempting to figure out whether or not to attack us. Lieutenant Stoker made his way over to our foxhole as he looked into our M151 at the figure in the tree line. "What the fuck?" he whispered to himself, staring at the creature, which we were becoming more and more increasingly convinced was staring back. "Sir, what do you—" I began, but was cut off by a loud combination of a shriek and a roar as the thing took off on all fours, directly towards our position. 200 meters away. Shit, shit, shit! My mind screamed as I tried following the beast with my barrel, but it was incredibly fast. Within a few seconds, the thing was already more than halfway to our position, and closing fast, if we didn't do something. 100 meters away. "Contact!" Lieutenant Stoker screamed, which was repeatedly yelled throughout the camp as soldiers made their way to help us hold the line. Strobe-like muzzle flashes rang out in front of me as I death-gripped the trigger, never letting go while Beads was belt-loading the rounds into the chamber. I recall praying and hoping that the loud noise and light would scare the monster away, as well as praying that it would not call our bluff. We had no real ammunition, save for the few Proctor security weapons against animals. All of our brass was blanks, with laser adapters. 50 meters. I could hear the beast screaming as it began to charge up the base of the hill, its features becoming more and more visible. Matted, patchy fur, a bare human chest, and facial features with ears which were both part man and part wolf. Glowing red eyes and claws for hands. 25 meters. I gripped my combat knife in its sheath with my left hand, never letting go of the trigger as my barrel began to glow red in the night. The ambient heat around it started to melt the snow near the bipod mount. As it came closer, I could hear the shouting from the middle of the line as the Proctors took aim with their loaded M16s and began firing at the creature. This time, hearing sickening cracks as the rounds connected with its lanky body. The kinetic energy from the rounds caused the creature to rear backwards onto its hind legs, exposing its chest for more. 3-round bursts set the monster falling backwards, all while screaming and wailing as it began to run down the hill for a full-blown retreat. As the creature ran into the tree line, the Proctors continued to fire shots until a ceasefire command was heard, and we were once again engulfed by the cosmic lights above us and the stillness of the night. Radio chatter buzzed to life as the Proctors called for an index, end of exercise, and an emergency helivac. We were given express orders to pack up our gear and get ready for transport within 20 minutes. We could hear all too familiar buzzing of helicopters, followed by the guide of flares being lit up and thrown down at our location for the landing zone. Despite all this excitement, once I harnessed myself into the aircraft, I immediately fell asleep as the adrenaline left my frozen body. The next day, we were debriefed and informed that we would have to do the entire operation over again, but we would pick up where we left off in about a week's time. The report to hire from the lieutenant and the Proctors was that a large wolf, probably starving and separated from its pack, had driven to attack alone due to hunger. However, we know the real story. Beads, that evening while we were in the barracks, built a small shrine with a few of his talismans, ruins, and a few sets of small bones and began to pray for our safety, as well as the safety of his tribe and the animals in the forest. After he was done, he got up and tied 2 lanyards of beads to the post of our bunks. I noticed his red puffy eyes as he laid down in the bunk which is next to myself and Anchor, and turns to face towards us. He sighed, reading the questions we had on our faces, and began to explain what that thing was. After Beads had seen the rabbit and received the terrible feeling, he noticed that the small rabbit had not been eaten, but merely killed out of the cruelty or sport. This, coupled with the creature we saw later that day, confirmed what Beads had been fearing: an adlet. Beads explained that an adlet was a Wendigo-like werewolf being, in Inuit lore, the cursed offspring of a woman and a dog. Adlets were known to their tribes to stalk and kill anyone in the frozen wastes that intrude on their territory or that wander into the forest. According to him, whole hunting parties have been killed by adlets. and that we were very lucky to have escaped with our lives, especially considering that Beads was unable to burn sage and herbs to ask the Great Spirits to protect us when we left. Despite that day being a few years ago and more than 3,000 miles away, I have all but lost my ability to comfortably go hiking, to the disappointment of my wife. I don't have the heart to tell her why I refuse to go in the woods anymore, especially at night. On the few nights I must spend outside sleeping in a patrol base for my National Guard duties here in Utah, while I'm a college student, I make sure to burn sage and ask a higher power for protection from whatever could be out there. While sometimes it feels silly or overly suspicious to do so, the memory of those horrifying howls and shrieks drives away any fear of me being mocked by my unit, and replaces them with fear from the night when I saw the true horror under the Aurora. Well, NoSleep, I would like to thank you again for being with me tonight, and I hope that you all enjoyed the story. I'll try to put another story from a hospital security guard by next week, but as I'll be taking the weekend off to spend time with my wife, it may or may not happen. Anyways, have a great night, and I will see you all soon. CavalierRigg. And guys, always thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. Hope you enjoyed the story. I have a lot of good stuff in the backlog to get through. Hope you guys are excited for what's coming next. We're going to be taking a trip to Pennsylvania, and then we're going to be at a gas station on the outskirts of town. Good night, everyone.